This is not, can you admit more students? This is, what if every student graduates? What if when you admit a student, it's a promise? And what if you fix the problems in your own institution that create booby traps and landmines that trip up students who could graduate but don't? And it's often we're the problem.
Hey everyone, my name's Kyle Wallgren, and this is another episode of the Business of Education. Today we have an amazing guest on with us. Her name is Dr. Bridget Burns, one of the most innovative minds in higher education. As the founder and CEO of University Innovation Alliance, she has helped 17 of the top universities work together to increase student success, leading to 143,000 more graduates, including 89% increase in graduates of color. Dr. Burns has been featured on 60 Minutes, New York Times, The Washington Post with her groundbreaking work. She is on a mission to make higher education more accessible, and she's doing an amazing job. Thanks. Bridget, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's so awkward to listen to people do your intro. It's like, cringe. But yes, those things are factually true.
I guess I totally understand where you're coming from. I just think that people that do what you do or have done, it needs to be screamed from the mountaintops, because there's a lot of holes in education. If you turn on the news right now,
don't recommend it. 0 out of 10.
All they're talking about, right? But there's people, no matter where you stand on it, there's great people in the education system, like yourself, that have done amazing things, and they do it for the right reason. It's not about, making some money on the back end. It's about helping people, and you've got a very specific mission. And it looks like it's working for you. So I love to promote that and point a light on the great people in the education space, because I feel like they get overlooked so often. So,
well, thanks.
Higher education. How'd you get here? Why'd you start in education? It seems like a lot of people have the same little bit of story, but everybody's got their own twist to it. So what got you into education?
Well, higher education changed my life, and I feel a great debt of gratitude to pay it forward. I grew up in poverty in rural Montana, very unlikely to end up going to college for a million reasons, and through like scrappy circumstances, ended up getting there, and it fundamentally changed my perspective of myself and the world around me, and gave me a passion to try and create a similar kind of light bulb moment for other people. And so yeah, like I was one of those people who got bit early and just kind of like, this is it, man. This is the work. This is like, I love what it did for me, and I love what it does in the lives of so many others, where it really just kind of, I think about it that geniuses are born in any zip code, in any kind of family, and that talent will just remain nascent if it isn't activated. And that for me was what higher ed did. It totally activated potential talent, and I owe everything to it. So yeah,
I like the way you said that geniuses are born in every zip code. I got into education 100% by accident. I actually didn't go to university. I quit school in grade 9. It wasn't my thing. I suffered with literacy issues that followed me through school. I was bullied. I hated it. So I went and got a job. But when I became a father, my mission in life changed. And when my daughter asked me to teach her how to read during COVID and I couldn't do it, I felt for the first time in my life, the very first time, like a failure. And because I wasn't going to let my kids down, I got into education. But it wasn't, I've only been in this space for 4 years, and it's probably the most empowering feeling I've ever had, knowing that you're bringing good to somebody else other than yourself. Totally. And it just like fills you up every day. You're like, okay, today's going to be tough, but I'm going to make an impact. And it's such an amazing feeling to be able to go through that. You guys, give us a little bit of background about your company and what you guys do.
So we're a nonprofit, and it's something that is a consortium of universities that, while yes, I am the founding CEO, and I've been here from the beginning, and have been the person doing the work on the ground. This was actually the idea of a group of college presidents. Originally, it was 11 of them, who were all former first generation, low income, and students of color. Because that's the common thread I see, is that the people who do bold and ambitious work in my sector are people who've also been touched by higher ed. They feel this debt of gratitude. They also want to pay it forward. And so this group of presidents had a question, like an idea of what if we, instead of thinking about our competition and how much we are, pitted against each other on every front, what if we actually linked arms instead of we're elbows out? What if we actually decided to try and solve some of the big problems in our sector, like the fact that half of all people who go into college don't actually end up with a degree? How about the fact that we're failing low income students, first generation students of color? And we were really set up for failure if you think about US economic competitiveness, if we didn't figure that out. And the bigger question was like, there's a lot of adorable tinkering in this sector, super cute. But if you really want to drive innovation, we need to focus on scale. And there are things that have been figured out and they just stay like they are trade secrets. And so from the beginning, that was kind of solving that problem. This group of leaders kind of gave me the support and the permission to paint and to build this alliance. And so we basically start with the premise that higher education has to innovate. It has to change. We don't think it needs to stay the same. And we're willing to hold ourselves accountable. We share data transparently. It's a very you actually have to prove it in this trusting network. And we innovate together to solve shared problems, which turns out most of the problems in the sector are the same. And then we scale all the best ideas from place to place and give everything away in a very public way, because we are trying to model a behavior that will change the value system of the sector so that it is less focused on the elites, less focused on the fastest way to move your graduation rate up for most universities is to just don't admit poor people. And that seems super messed up if you think about what the future of America needs, which is more talent activated, right? Mm-hmm. And so my institutions, basically we scale innovative ideas that work and we riff on them and evolve them and adapt them. And we set big goals to see if we can actually punch above our weight. Originally, when we first rolled out, it was announced publicly by President Obama, actually, our first goal was 68,000 more graduates by 2025. And it's now 2025. And we've hit, in your intro, you shared one number. It's actually updated since then. Now it is, which I haven't announced, 164,000 graduates above, which means above our stretch capacity. This is not, can you admit more students? This is, what if every student graduates? What if when you admit a student, it's a promise? And what if you fix the problems in your own institution that create booby traps and landmines that trip up students who could graduate but don't? And it's often we're the problem. We start with the premise that higher ed was never designed around students. System change is necessary to fix all of that. And you're really unlikely to do any systems change if you go it alone. So yeah, that's where this came from. It was other people who lead institutions, but I have the privilege of kind of standing in between them and helping them see that their problems are all the same and that there is a dearth of leadership in this space. We need strong leadership. We need to change how higher education operates, and it's possible. It's unlikely for any big leadership change to happen in the sector if it were one institution at a time. But we can build a small group that can actually push each other and make sure that the work is legit and drive the rest of the sector forward. And that's what we've been doing.
So when are you going to take on the elementary space and middle school space?
Well, I start with trying to only do stuff that I've actually had the courage to do, right? So I have not taught in that space, but I do think, there's a lot of reform work that has happened already in K-12, and that there's a lot of complexity in that space. But I would say we have a responsibility to reimagine the way that we engage with K-12 and with students when the decision-making process about higher education is starting. And we have to change the way that it is structured and ordered. I will say that is broken, and that is something we want to fix, which is it makes no sense that you as a young person are not being intentionally educated about career opportunities before you have to choose a college, before you have to choose a particular major. It's completely backwards. We should do a much better job connecting college and career on the front end. And we have a model that we want to pursue with that. And I'm just trying to raise the money for it right now. But that's where I would go into that space is just admitting that we're the problem is always a good way to start. And I think higher ed has been a problem in how we show up to K-12.
I love that. I love when you're an amazing leader in your company, but whenever there's a problem within the company, I try to find a way to let everybody know that it was my fault, or find out how it was my fault to let them down, because it's so easy to point the finger and pass the buck, but great leaders find a way to make sure that their team knows that it's a top-down failure, and that we can all grow together. So I love the way you said that.
I would just say it's one of the things that is like a luxury for me is we focus on the design, because design is agnostic, right? Like, I believe that people work in higher ed because they care, because they want to pay it forward. It's really hard to motivate people to do innovation and change if they feel like they're being attacked. And so we start by just acknowledging that colleges and universities were never designed around students. They were originally designed around the faculty. And now at best, they're designed in reaction to like a million things that they can't control coming from the outside. They play defense only, no offense. And that it's all about design. And so if it's about design, then you can design your way out of it. And it's not about motivation, and it's not about intent. And so we try and set it up so that it's not targeting anyone. It's actually giving someone something to be part of.
No, that makes perfect sense. When you started this, you're at 19 campuses now. When you started this, what was the first problem you wanted to focus in? Because there needs to be a starting place. I'm starting to rebuild a car with my kids, and my neighbor's like, "Where are you going to start?" I'm like, "I have no idea. I'm just going to start taking it apart." But how'd you guys pick where to start? Because there's so many places to start.
I mean, in the first year, so what we do is like these very large, there's a proven innovation that works somewhere, and then you take it to the other campuses. So I started with 11 campuses. So the challenge is, first, how do you build trust between a group of institutions who have only ever competed with each other on the sports field or in the research arena, or for students? How do you get them to actually recognize that, actually same team? And so we used our first project for that. And the first, I think, broader technology related problem that we scaled was predictive analytics, which is the idea that basically colleges and universities, all their data is in like 9 dirty boxes in their basement, totally disconnected, not the same system. They don't communicate. And so, I told you that I grew up in poverty. My situation was I grew up in a family of 4 living on less than $20,000 a year. I worked really hard to get the information to file for the federal government to get my FAFSA, and to get a Pell Grant. So I'm thinking, as a student, I've filled this out. I've also told my community college and later my university that I'm a low-income student. Of course, these people know, right? And so, of course, knowing my background, they're going to reach out, hook me up with some support when I run into, a wall, right? That's what students think. They naturally think these are the adults. These are the smart people. And if I tell them any information, of course, they're running a real legitimate business operation here. So that information is going to flow. Other people know it. They're going to have my back. What they don't know is that our data systems being totally disconnected and we are at best reacting means that, a student, I constantly had to repeat myself. Nobody let me know. At no point did someone teach me how to use an academic advisor. Turns out students assume that you'll tell them if they need advice, right? They don't naturally go to the advisor. I didn't go to office hours because that seems like when people do office work. There's coded language. It's not set up for them, right? And so for me, I took really interesting classes, and it took me, I graduated. It took me 7 years to graduate. And when I did, I had 50 credits that I'd paid for that didn't actually count, and $50,000 in student loans. So
oh, wow.
That is an example of why you would need predictive analytics, because you actually want that when a student trips up, that you as the institution reach out and let them know before they would ever even know they did something wrong. So you register for the wrong classes. You get a grade that we've actually looked at, like that grade might be passing technically, but people who take that class in the order you did and they get a C, they actually graduate at a far lower clip than people who get a B. And so this is a moment for us to talk about coaching, getting you some tutoring, or just make sure that you're getting the support you need. We don't do that. So we wait for students to self-identify that they need to go to an advisor and to solve their own problem. And that makes no sense. And so predictive analytics in year one was essentially scaling a model from one campus that had eliminated all their equity gaps. And essentially what they did is every student, every week, they would get, because their data systems were connected and they were able to look at the historical data and like who used to, like what students historically have dropped out, what were the things that let us know, what was the tripwire they hit before they left. And so when a student hits a tripwire on Monday, Georgia State would get, they would find out the 1,000 students who have an issue, and they would reach out and they would immediately deploy 3,000 advising hours that week. The advisor reaches out to you proactively and says, hey, you don't know this, but that actually is an issue. And so let's get you on the right track. And what they did just systematically over time is you're anticipating you're playing offense. You're actually preempting any issues. You're making it so that students can actually get the support they need. So that is the first problem, is that the history of higher ed is our data systems don't do that. And our advising model is based on getting lucky. And that students will just, I don't know, like magically know that they have a problem. And so we scaled both those interventions across the UIA and have seen that's been a huge part of our work is first triaging and addressing that, when I say we're the problem and it's not designed around students, that's what I mean.
Thank you. So what year was year one for you guys?
2004. Well, actually, we worked in secret for a year in 2013, but we launched publicly in 2014. And
so
that's like helpful for people to know that when you're going to start something, if you go public before you've actually done anything, that's kind of a flag that you're probably not going to do any real work. We figured out like data sharing agreements, like how are we going to handle if somebody underperformed and stuff? You want those conversations in private. Right. You don't want to have that after you've already been out on stage. So we had a year in private that we figured that stuff out.
The reason I asked that is a lot of these stuffs are kind of right now we're going through this like whole AI overload where all these predictive tools are starting to become everyday pieces of our lives. But you guys were doing this before AI was cool.
We did implement chatbots back in 2016, 17, which were AI enabled. So yeah, we've been at this for a bit. Yeah.
And are you finding that like these larger models are helping you guys make these, see these tripwires a little bit earlier in advance? Like, is it helping you guys make those identifications or where students are running into roadblocks earlier, or has it helped in that area yet?
So it depends on the provider, right? So there's a company called Mainstay that is the chatbot provider that I'm most familiar with their work. And they've had the most like randomized control trials and studies on their work. And actually it works. Whereas that's not true of like others necessarily. And they are in constant communication back and forth using nudging and text messages with students, and their system and their way that they communicate with the universities that they are part of has made a huge difference. They've been able to intervene, and there's been there's been more than 30 cases of preventing a student suicide, things like that. Like there's definitely ways that AI enabled bots can be really supportive and effective. I would say in the day-to-day space of the work we do, I use AI all the time, but I don't actually know. I mean, I would say that I'm looking forward to seeing how other people use it to handle this kind of work, because it's much more like for it to actually work to address the stuff that we're dealing with, you need these to happen on data systems, and it's not always on data systems.
That makes sense.
I mean, I think the thing I want to do next with AI is diagnosing email barrage, and how do you, so one of the things we discovered is universities completely overwhelm students. One of our early projects, Michigan State process mapped the first 90 days from when a student gets admitted to the day they show up. And they found that they were sending 450 emails to every incoming student during that window. And there were 50 types of holds a student could have on their account, preventing them from registering the university didn't know could exist. That example, the fact that when I talk about the trust, building the trust, that's the kind of stuff that was so valuable, because they are willing to share that So then my other campuses are like, great, we're going to take that idea and we're going to actually see what our number is. It's 500, it's 600, it's overwhelming. And so figuring out ways to come up with a communications cop, a triage strategy, and how do we actually more effectively communicate with them. That's one that was Post-it notes and people in a room. I think that you could use AI to actually inform and kind of provide clear analysis of the communications overwhelm and ideally refine the approach of institutions. And I think that that's the space that needs to be built out.
It's so interesting. You feel like, when I got into the ed tech space, it was 2020. I'm like, all of these ideas have to exist. It's 2020, but then when you get into like education, which I would feel like should be the number one focused on thing in our country, K-12, higher education, all of that should be our priority because this is our future. These kids are our future. When I'm old and, can't provide for the country anymore or be value, I want to make sure that I'm going to be taken care of and that it's still going to be a good place. So in doing that, we need to give them the best opportunities, tools, and resources to be successful. And I just feel like as a country, we don't do that very well.
I think that you're right about those intentions. I think the reasons why it hasn't happened are pretty reasonable and can be solved. I think that there's a problem. There's a disconnect that venture wants to fund products, not services.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a sector that you have to have a service component that's much stronger because, turnover, transition, FTE shortage, like there's major issues. You need actual hands-on support for implementation. Universities and colleges and K-12 schools don't want to spend money on things without efficacy studies. And so ed tech founders need validation. They need to prove that their product works, but they need to be able to have somebody take a chance on them. But they always have to ask to charge for them to experiment on your students. So there's a real problem there, but there's a way for us to develop a mutually reinforcing and beneficial cycle because faculty need to do research to get tenure. Why don't we have them doing efficacy studies, publishing those to actually help? Why don't we make it so that VCs actually create funds to make it so that organizations like mine could have access to ed tech that's emergent, and my campuses would be able to support case studies around their implementation, basically, and give feedback to improve the product. We can build an ecosystem that is mutually reinforcing. It's just that right now it's very segmented and fractured. Mm-hmm. But I actually think I think we're all the same team. We just don't know it.
No, I agree with you. And that's why I do these podcasts, because I am the same team and I want to understand the whole space to see how I can bring value to it. When you guys focus on, or you guys do a lot of work with lower income students, right? That's where a lot of your guys' work is done. But I feel like preparing these kids, they've been lower income their whole life for the most part, right? Mm-hmm. So making sure that we're preparing them at early elementary all the way through K-12 to make sure that they can go into higher education and be post-education ready is something that I feel like we need to do better, so then we can get kids into your guys' hands and you can make sure that they're successful there too. Mm-hmm. And it just feels like we're missing it still. The numbers came out on our national averages over the last few weeks and they're consistently going down, right? So we're not, if you look at those numbers, we're not getting kids ready to go to mm-hmm. higher education, and then it just makes your guys' job even harder to make sure that they succeed.
Well, part of this is the approach, right? Is that too often, and this butts up to the current DEI conversation, right? Is that too often you look at the approach that's applied to address a gap, and the strategy seems to be, we're going to find a group that historically has not done well, and we're going to just focus on them, and we're going to surround them with additional supports or create a center for them or additional bolt-on solution. And that is not actually the approach. That's not mm-hmm. our approach at all. We're not creating interventions for low-income students, for first-generation students, or students of color. All of our work is just data-based to all students. And we just look at the numbers and our performance on the ways that we have historically failed. So to make this more clear, the model at Georgia State that I mentioned earlier, where they managed to eliminate race and income as a predictor of outcome. They're the first university to do it. like not by cheating, not by changing who they admit. They systematically looked at the data and they applied interventions in the way that I described to you. And it was just over time, just obsessed every student. They did not even have an internal measure for income or race, but they eliminated all disparity. So
That's
it means that
amazing.
they just applied a universal method to every student and it closed their equity gaps. So when people think about if they're trying to figure out what's going to happen going forward, I'm like, nothing changes for us. This approach has always been all students obsessively, we're applying database interventions consistently over time. And we are obsessed with recognizing that these systems were not designed around them and we're going to intervene immediately, no matter who the student is. That's actually how you eliminate gaps. So if you want to work on low income students, you actually are going to apply an intervention for every income quartile is actually how you're going to do it.
That makes sense. And I think like naturally, as you mentioned, you came from a poverty background. I grew up very poor as well. That made me a hard worker. You know what I mean? It gave me the desire to be better, to have more. So that was ingrained in me. So just giving me the same resources or access to the same opportunities, not even resources, opportunities, made me work harder to achieve them. I didn't need any special treatment. Just let me have the same access to it. And I'll prove to you that I can do this without anything else. I just want a chance, and I don't want to be looked at differently because I am different. I just want to go and prove to you that I'm the same. And I think that we do look at that a little bit wrong, like you mentioned. And if we change just the way we looked at things, that we could get a lot bigger results and outcomes.
It's really helpful to just know that this, and frankly, K-12 was never designed around students. When we started, if you look all the way back in history, the first classroom, it was designed around the one thing that we had as an asset, which was the teacher. Mm-hmm. Because no one would pay you for it. And it makes sense why we did it. It wasn't intentional, but at no point have you centered the needs of students. And so if it was never designed around students, and there are a lot of booby traps and landmines, a low-income student, a first-generation student, a student of color, they're just a student. They just have an extra backpack of experiences or challenges that makes it so that, and they don't have an uncle who's a lawyer to call, right? It's just that, but it's all the same. It is literally a design problem that you never made it. If you think about think about Amazon, right? What a user-centered design experience is like. When something anticipates your needs, it feels so intuitive. It's lovely. Mm-hmm. That's the opposite of what we have for our students. And so, the fact that gaps emerge is not because we've set traps for low-income students. It's that there's just, frankly, those challenges should not exist for anyone, and we need to consistently address them. And you will actually address the issues for those communities.
I love that. It just doesn't make a good headline in the news, right? But I love what you're saying.
It might. I mean, it is the counter narrative, I think, to what people think is the work of student success. But for me, this has been the exact same work from day one. It was always about the economic competitiveness of the United States, and you apply it across the board.
And you've mentioned amazing schools like Georgia, who I would think is like one of the most competitive schools. If you look at their football program,
it's Georgia State.
Okay, so you work with Georgia State?
Work with Georgia State, which is it's an institution. I mean, so if you're just a member of the public and you think about higher ed, you know about the Ivy League and you know about the big football schools, right? Mm-hmm. So in my world, I run the Ivy League of Student Success Innovation, and it's not the same school. Sometimes it is, right? But it's a very particular type of institution that is committed to taking fundamental responsibility for the outcomes of their state and is willing to admit students who are, I think of it as kind of like if you only admit students who have high grades, it's kind of cheating. It's kind of saying you don't know how to educate someone regardless of their background. Now, I graduated high school with a 2.3 GPA for a lot of different reasons. I am not an unintelligent person, right? I was also a state champion in debate. So, but for a college to look at me and decide that they wouldn't give me a shot because my GPA wasn't what it should be, they're essentially admitting that they don't know what to do. They don't know how to educate a person. And I think the ultimate standard is that you will actually admit students across the full spectrum and be able to see if you can truly bring forth their talent, if you can really activate their genius, because I do think that the big challenges in society are probably going to be solved by somebody who we are overlooking. And anyway, Georgia State has a history of admitting students for lower GPA, and they are much more. They're vital part of the Atlanta community, and but they historically really failed students, and they doubled their graduation rate, fundamentally changed themselves in a big way. And in my world, they are the gold standard for student success.
That's so awesome. The I love the way that you put that. When you look at what Georgia State has done to become the gold standard, where do you think they've maybe accelerated where other schools could focus on a little bit more?
It's really about they benefited from the biggest threat to this work and to my sector is turnover and transition. The job of the presidency is so volatile, and I have campuses that have had 5 presidents in 5 years, 7 presidents in 9 years. Right, when you lose your boss, everything changes. People freeze, or it feels like it's on fire. Georgia State had the same president with the same lead to implement this work for more than a decade. And that made a huge difference. They found the right people. They built the right team. They focused on, they created a strategic plan that was on one piece of paper. And number one was they wanted to become the national model for student success. Nobody's ever done that. Nobody's ever put 5 items and put that on the top. Like the clarity about where they wanted to go, and that they were, that means they didn't pursue football success. They didn't pursue, you have to make a choice, right? And a lot of institutions don't make this choice. I think I would say there's a lot of things I could unpack about that example, but I also have like Arizona State, I have Michigan State, Iowa State, I have other institutions who have replicated, modeled, or inspired similar types of action and work. I think at the end of the day, it's about, do you actually take innovation and change management seriously? Do you understand how to lead people and actually give them the space and the time to work on their work so that they can actually execute? Because this data stuff is so I don't even know how many institutions have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy a predictive analytic data system that never fully gets implemented, because now they're going to transition to Workday. Now they're doing and then they lose their president, and then they get a budget cut, and then right. And so it's like, how do you have consistent, focused action? It's the same stuff from the startup space and from
I was about
you
to
think
say
about companies at scale. It's like these are massive, multi-billion-dollar footprinted bureaucracies, and so it's about how do you drive change in large organizations, consistent execution, focus, have a clear goal. Probably actually use, don't think you have to invent every solution. That's been pretty big. And our sector is kind of guilty of that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff there.
I have a good friend of mine that was one of I think the first 50 people that worked at FedEx. So he sat in the room with Fred Smith as they were building FedEx. And I asked him, if you were to take one thing that you learned from working with this guy that ultimately changed the way we ship things today, what would you take from him? And he's like, Fred would never let us look at more than 3 things at a time. Mm-hmm. We picked 3 things. We focused on those 3 things until they were right. And then we moved on to the next 3 things. People build this big, long list of stuff they want to fix, and it just never gets done because it's too long. But, so that's one of the things that I've really tried to implement into my life is let's focus on these things. What are our needs today? Once we fix these 3 things, let's pick another 3 things. And then
that clarity, that focus, and doing it over time. I mean, it's really, at the end of the day, it requires real leadership, and it is actually rare. For me, I look at higher education, thousands of universities. I've worked with more than 50 college presidents at this point in time. And it is the training to become a president does not stop off here before you get there. Right? It does not actually teach you how to do this kind of vision execution and strategy focus. It's, I became a chair, then I became a dean. I survived. That's literally for many of them, it is, you survived some of the worst jobs that you could possibly have. Being an academic chair is one of the hardest and worst jobs in the academy. And if you just keep going, somehow you end up a provost. That job is terrible. You basically have to handle all the problems of the institution with the faculty, and you're kind of always wrong. And then maybe then you survive and you get to the presidency. It's not because, you get tapped because you're an incredible leader. It's because you just survived this gauntlet of tasks, and you know the place, and you're credible, and you're also secretly a researcher. It's like, so it's a rare thing, and they get there, and then now they have to figure out how to make this massive bureaucracy scale, change, innovate. It's like, we don't set them up for success, and so those of them who do are truly exceptional, and I'm very fortunate to work with those folks. So
the one thing you mentioned early on, you said you're raising money to expand what you guys are doing. You briefly brushed across venture investments, like just skimmed across the word. Companies in the ed tech space, raising money is one of the hardest, or in education period, is one of the hardest things there is to do, in my opinion. A lot of people say they want to make a difference, but when it comes time to cutting a check, they're like, I can make more money over here. I can see a higher ROI over here, and they skim over education. Why do you think that is? And how do you think us as a whole could bring more investment into the education space, and make education better? Because, things do need money to grow.
So because I run a nonprofit and I raise money from philanthropy, it's slightly different. I am familiar with what you're talking about with venture. And I think that that both spaces are poorly designed. If you think about it, people are just responding to, the system. Every system's perfectly designed to get the results they get, right? So with venture, it's like, you talk to folks in the venture community, and it's like they get to make a bet on a style of investment. And if that does not work out, they never get to advocate for that kind of investment again. It's so risky for them in terms of their career, right? And then they have to identify these promising companies and try and predict what the biggest problems are going to be in a sector. And sometimes the people who are founders aren't stylistically as great at communicating with bureaucrats who work at universities, right? So there's what I often run into in the ed tech space is people do not product match. They do not solution match. I do not know that I need a chatbot. What I know is that my frontline staff are exhausted and I'm losing them, overwhelming them. They get the same repetitive requests. Turns out those are the same thing. I would want a chatbot to solve that, but I'm looking for the problem. And too often companies do not lead with the problem, and they don't help us be able to make it easy for us to figure out exactly what solutions we need, right? Like, I don't want to know what you did. Talk to me about the case study of the problem that you were trying to solve and help me find, do I have that problem? And then you want to try and create spaces like what we have, where it's a community of practice where people are like, hey, dude, if you have this problem, you want to try this particular provider. And by the way, here's an example of my contract. Don't work with this person, work with this person, and that's what I run, is a community practice where people actually, if an idea gets into the alliance, it goes viral. We are like predictive analytics, when we first started, was not even a word that was used in our sector. And now it's pretty common. Chatbots, we implemented them. People were like, what is that? Now it's pretty common. And so that's what we want, is to normalize these more innovative practices. But that's your space in terms of venture. My world is, I struggle because philanthropy, they are drawn to projects. They love to fund my projects, right? And the way we work is I raise money from big philanthropy, and then my campuses match the money. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, I've raised $44 million thus far.
Dang.
And the vast majority of that has gone to the campuses, and then the campuses match the money. So it's not what I can pay them to do. It's what actually they will put their own money into, and therefore it's their idea, right? And then
they get the buy-in too.
Well, they sustain it, right? Because it's like, I don't want to waste their time doing something and not work. But philanthropy likes to fund a project that I bring them. But the reality is, the actual value here, the je ne sais quoi, is the trusting network I run. And I am frequently running out of money for the thing that creates the trusting network, which is the convenings that bring people together so they can talk about their problems and they can actually problem match. And that's just one of those things that happens in the nonprofit world, is that there's always a disconnect, I think, between how the funder sees what they're looking for and how the organization actually provides the thing they're looking for. Is that, operating overhead is always like, I'm always in that breathless space, but then I have an abundance when it comes to project money.
That makes sense. The Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Do you think that was it always a nonprofit? Like, is that how you started?
It's actually fiscally sponsored through Arizona State. So I think other people might see this as a almost like an institution or something, but that was just to stay scrappy and lean because I don't have to pay for lawyers, I don't pay for HR. I have a small team of 8 people around the country. We're all virtual. We have been always, and but I pay them through Arizona State University, and then we have sub grants to all of our campuses. So yeah, it started as a nonprofit, and but we're like we don't show up on the list that Mackenzie Scott would be like seeing of nonprofits in the sector. We're kind of in a weird space because we are fiscally sponsored.
The
Which, if you know her, by the way, that is my, you know, I'm just saying, I would very much like to be on one of those lists.
on yeah, we can talk about it. You've got to advise some of the greatest leaders in education, even work with presidents. You know, what's that experience been like for you?
It's been it's really interesting. So I part of my success and the reason why this role worked for me is that I'm not scared of presidents. I have tremendous empathy for them. I think a lot of people early in my career thought I would want to be a college president, but the more I learned about the job, the more it made me realize that like, I don't want to be one of them. I want to help them make them better because I saw how college presidents every day, all day, 15-minute increments from like 7 a.m. until 10 o'clock at night, back to back. Every interaction they have is with someone who wants something from them or who works for them. And they lack peripheral vision. They don't have buddies who are presidents.
Mm-hmm.
They say they have friends who are presidents, but when they're in the foxhole and their board is coming for them, they don't call those people, right? They're in this highly competitive sector that makes it so that you feel like you can't talk to anyone else who has that job because you're competing on the football field, on the research field, against for students, all these other things. And so I was just like, God, that's like the most isolating and lonely job. And yet it's the thing that I've seen such incredible impact created from. So I have reverence for the role, but I can see its weakness and its design. And I actually came into this work because when I was in college at Oregon State, a year and a half after I walked onto campus as a transfer student from a community college, I was elected student body president. And a year and a half after that, the governor of Oregon appointed me to the State Board of Higher Education. So at 22 years old, I was now in the position with a group of other, people who were like business leaders. We were hiring and firing college presidents and evaluating them. And so that was my unusual experience is like, I understood the job from the jump in a way that I think other people didn't. And I wasn't intimidated by them, but I just have compassion for the role. And so I've gotten to work with really some of the most visionary ones. Obviously, Michael Crow is kind of the most innovative leader in American higher education history, and he's at Arizona State. And he is actually the chair of my board and is the person who I shadowed for a year during. I went through something called the American Council on Education Fellowship, which is like baby president school, where you're shadowing a president. And so that was where I learned much of what their day-to-day experience is like. And yeah, it's a position that people do not have enough compassion for. It is an impossible job. People see how much they get paid and they don't understand, like, you couldn't pay me enough. You couldn't pay me. Like, honestly, I know what the life is like. They're literally always making people unhappy. Everyone's unhappy. Students are unhappy. Faculty are unhappy. Donors are unhappy. The press, the media, policymakers. It's like, it's an impossible job to thread that needle and to advance a compelling vision when right now, I mean, they're dealing with like unexpected, because of the cuts and the freezes and the NIH stuff and the indirect cost changes. I mean, many universities woke up this week with like, $20 million cut unexpectedly, having to furlough people. It's wild. And yet they have to get up every day and try and put forward, when we talked earlier about the three items,
Mm-hmm.
imagine that and still having to try and put forward, like, here are the 3 things we're working on, folks, while you essentially feel like you're in the foxhole in the trenches by yourself all the time.
Yeah, I don't know what it's like at that in that position, but I know what that's like, and I'm sure you do as a CEO too. It seems like that's all you get to deal with is the fires too for a lot of it, But I get it. You as you were talking about that, and it's something that I always talk about on these podcasts, is you said that these presidents kind of live in this box where they don't have people to, really reach out to, and maybe network is the word that I use to it. Is there a way? Do you guys help with that networking? Do you help with that uh, function of being able to have these conversations with people who are in these same
Yeah.
situations? Is that something you guys focus on, and how important is that?
It's huge. It takes a lot of our time. It honestly started first. I thought you could put them in the room and, set them up with the right facilitation. It turns out you can't. It took shuttle diplomacy. I literally had to fly to different campuses. I had to look for and try and understand what reading their board minutes to see what are the metrics their board is pushing them on that they need help with. What do they all have in common? Where is there a place where one is struggling with this topic and turns out another president actually has figured that out, and try and connect them? But they're so busy that I had to do that for them. So I would literally fly to Iowa or Indiana, and I would show up and have my meeting, and I'd be like, what's the one thing that your board is breathing down your neck on that you're concerned that you don't have an answer for? Cool. This president has that solution, and here's what I know about it. I'm going to follow up and connect you, but I'm also going to get you those answers so that you start realizing, over time, I basically ran a campaign that was, you all have the same problems. They are different color, flavor, texture, geography, same problem though, right? At the end of the day, it's like, how do you lead people? How do you manage them effectively to actually step up? How do you navigate these unexpected hurdles? How do you actually try and make this machine change when it's set up to stay the same way it is, right? Like, universities are older than the church. They were designed to last. They were not designed to change. So it is a strange act. But yeah, I would say leaning in and trying to make sure they can develop some compassion for each other was a lot of work. But now we just came from our retreat where all the presidents and provosts and chancellors get together, and all we do is talk about the stuff that's tough and try and pitch and catch ideas together.
That sounds awesome. You're right. When we built the education system, the money came from people that had a very specific need, and we built education to fill that need. And that was a long time ago. And, things have changed dramatically, especially with the way we use technology and how busy and how many distractions are around today. So you're so right. Bridget, I am so grateful to have had the opportunity to talk with you today. If somebody had any questions about what you're doing, wanted to get you maybe on their podcast to help spread your message, because what the work you guys is doing is amazing. How do they get a hold of you? What's the best way to go about that?
Well, so I actually have a podcast called the Innovating Together podcast that we broadcast on LinkedIn on a regular basis. People can watch episodes there. Find me. I'm easiest there, but I would say just my email is bridget@theuia.org, and our website, theuia.org. I would say our newsletter is actually premium, 10,000 subscribers, 60% open rate, really high value.
That's amazing.
And we are very noisy because we're trying to galvanize change. And so whether it's the live stream shows, the podcast, we've created for other universities, we've created something called the lab where they can go in and get templates and tools and downloadable items to solve their problems. But yeah, I would just say probably LinkedIn is the easiest thing.
I love LinkedIn. It's an amazing tool. That's how we found out about you and your work. So I'm a believer in it. We will share those links in the description of this video as well. But Bridget, thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing learning from you today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. This has been really a lovely conversation.